Alright, so I have finished reading Rhythm of War, and it is time to review it. By the way, for the rest of the video, I'm going to be sitting in a different position because I lost a few segments of the video in editing, so I had to refilm the intro and one other part in the middle of the video. So, thank you for watching. Here's your review. For this video, I'm going to do two sections, non-spoiler and spoiler. So for non-spoiler, I'm going to go over my usual reviewing categories, and for spoiler, I'm just going to go over the parts of the book that I wanted to talk about, basically, because there were a lot of those parts. And I'm a little bit confused about the non-spoiler section. I'm still going to do it just to kind of go over the big categories, but honestly, here are my short thoughts on the matter. If you've read the Stormlight Archive up to this point, then Rhythm of War is worth it. It's a really good book, some awesome character development goes on, some really cool implications for the rest of Brandon Sanderson's works, but also just in this book. And if for some reason you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, if you haven't read The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, what are you doing here? Go read The Way of Kings, because it's a beautiful book that leads into a beautiful series that's totally worth it. Unfortunately, I do not have a video reviewing The Way of Kings. I will fix that atrocity soon, now that I have realized it exists. But for now, I'm going to start in my non-spoiler review of Rhythm of War. So the first category I'm going to go over is plot. And Stormlight books are plotted very interestingly. They're divided into 5 parts. Brandon Sanderson plots them as a trilogy, which is very interesting, but it's divided into 5 parts. And while reading the first part of Rhythm of War, it felt kind of slow. I was a little bit, expecting more drama, and that was Brandon Sanderson's trick to get me to let down my guard so that he could then break me. Yeah, I figured him out now. I'm totally not going to let him do it to me again at book 5, although by then I'll probably have forgotten and just get smashed again. So if you have gotten this far in the Stormlight Archive, you know that pacing can be slow sometimes. And this is one of those books that it's just like, read the beginning, enjoy the character interactions, learn, and wait. Because part 2 onward, maybe the end of part 2, is really worth it. It's really worth it. So the plot is segmented a lot into lots of different plot lines. The most interesting plotline is the Urithiru plotline, which I'm not going to get into, but very interesting. Part of me suspects that this might be one of those big plot archetypes that Brandon Sanderson likes to use. He talks a lot about how he used the heist archetype to plot Mistborn. I suspected that he did something similar with the Urithiru plotline, just because of the nuance of it. Is that how I want to put it? I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool, as well as heartbreaking, so much of the time, because it's a Stormlight book. I knew it was going to break my soul and my heart and all that was great and lovely, and then put it back together again. So I'm just going to come to the ending now. So Brandon Sanderson's endings, especially in the Stormlight Archive, are magnificent. And in this ending, I've heard people kind of arguing about whether or not this counts as a Brandon Sanderson avalanche. Not really arguing, but disagreeing. But I don't know. I hadn't realized that the concept of, is there a lot of plot happening here in this climax, to be controversial or hard to define, but apparently it is, because I've come to the conclusion that I don't care. It was a good ending. It was a good ending, lots of suspense, lots of tension, and I was very satisfied with it. In fact, I'm going to focus less on whether or not everything came together and more on character moments, which is kind of why I love the Stormlight Archive. So there were a lot of moments that I expected to happen. This is mostly because I'm really deep into the lore and theorizations and stuff like that, but I expected several moments that were going to happen. That did not make them any less emotionally satisfying. For example, there's this one moment, I'm not going to specify which for spoilers, that I had foreseen going on. And if you had read Oathbringer and were reading Rhythm of War, you could see this is most likely what's going to happen. So I'm like, okay. I did not expect it to happen in the manner that it did, and it just, the time and the place and everything where it happened, it was just Oh, it's so emotionally satisfying for me, especially since I'd been rooting for this to be happening for the longest time. So it wasn't just like, just happened out of the blue. It was, anyways, I love that segment. Anyways, moving on. The next segment I'd like to address is characters. And I actually wrote a list of the things I want to talk about because the Stormlight Archive has a lot of characters. Who would have thought? But especially this book, there were a lot of characters whose plots I was so invested in. So, Kaladin's arc, it's like, oh man, did Brandon Sanderson break my soul with that and put me back together. So, yeah, I'll talk about it later in the spoiler section. Navani, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Adolin and Maya, I love that. I'm kind of trash for that. Anyways, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's because Oathbringer spoilers. But anyways, Shallan, she's kind of interesting. No thoughts there. I want to keep out of that discussion. Venli, I don't know. I wasn't as invested in Venli as invested in Venli as some other people might have been, and I wanted more Dalinar. Besides that, though, great characters, and especially side characters. Some honorable mentions: Dabid, Yasna, Rlain, Leshwi, surprisingly. Characters. This is why I love the Stormlight Archive. I was drawn in because of the world building, and I stay there for plot and all of the great secrets, but the real reason that I love these books are the characters. And man, Brandon Sanderson hit this one out of the park on so many levels. Alright, so the next section is setting. So the Stormlight Archive has one of my favorite settings in all of fiction, I would say. And I'm not going to go in depth on that. If you are watching this video, you're probably decently familiar with the setting. I will note that I really enjoyed the sections of the video of Rhythm of War that were set near Etheru. So in Oathbringer, we got a pretty decent look at Etheru, but in Rhythm of War, we get an even better look. And it was such a good atmosphere. I really enjoyed that part of the book. So, there were other settings that were involved, but there was a big section in Etheru, and it was just great. So, 10 out of 10 there. Final note that I think belongs in setting. Rhythm of War has a lot of greater implications and hints at the Cosmere. So if you don't know, Brandon Sanderson writes a lot of his adult fantasy in this greater universe he calls the Cosmere. So, in a way, the Stormlight Archive and books like Mistborn happen in the same greater universe. And there's logic to this, and lots and lots of lore. I could talk about it all day. Not going to do it in this video, but maybe in a different one someday. But there are some hints and implications at this in Rhythm of War. And that was cool for me because I'm very into all of that. But I know that there are people who have, say, just read the Stormlight Archive and don't want to be confused. I started out as just a Stormlight reader, so I get where you're coming from. And while I can't say that I necessarily read these books in the same way you do now, I felt that Brandon Sanderson did a good job of weaving these implications and hints in a way that you're still going to be able to enjoy it. So he definitely did turned the camera up a little bit upward. He made it clear that there is a greater universe that has implications on Roshar. But I think that he did that in a way that it's not confusing, it's just letting everybody know, hey, there's worlds out there. And if you're reading that from just Stormlight Archive, nothing else, it's like, cool, there's other stuff out there. The story is still here. The people you care about, so far as I know, they're still here. And while there may be discoveries out there, that's not like, oh, you now must read 5 other books. More than 5, actually. There are a lot of books that Brandon Sanderson has written. But beyond that, I think, and I'm not really qualified to say, but I think that you can still read Rhythm of War without having had to read the entire Cosmere to make it make sense, which I think is a great thing because the Stormlight Archive is great, and if everybody who had read it up to this point had to stop and say, wait a second, I have to read like 15 other books, that would be bad. So I feel like Brandon Sanderson did a great job of that. As far as content goes, I considered to skip this section because basically the same as the rest of the Stormlight Archive. If you're comfortable with those, you'll probably be comfortable with this one. Obviously there are a lot of stuff with mental health. one of the characters is kind of suicidal. I don't really know how triggering that can be. I feel like the worst moment was the camera was a little bit far back, which I think was intentional, but I haven't really been in that mindset very deeply, so I don't really know. But there is that, and just slightly more swearing than before. Like, one character says a swear word once. It's fine. I'm slightly annoyed. I might be slightly annoyed, but I'm fine. It's fine. Moving on to the spoiler section. Where to start? So I guess I'll start with Kaladin. So I knew that it was going to be bad for Kaladin. So I think that I had read the Syl interlude that Brandon Sanderson sent to his emailed subscribers, so I knew a little bit about how Kaladin got relieved from duty and how he was struggling again. So I had that, and I knew from Oathbringer he was in a bad spot. It still hurt. It still hurt. It was interesting. So part of what made part 1 slow, I think, was just kind of waiting for what was coming with Kaladin. You could sense something was coming. And I think the end of part 1, Dalinar comes and says, hey, you're relieved from duty for a little while. Kaladin naturally flips out, but he realizes that it's the best. And part 2, I loved part 2 because you could just see Kaladin just kind of growing, and it's not like he wasn't dragging his feet, but you could see him kind of getting more healthy and relating with his family and with Adolin and Shallan, and everything was great. And even Teft came when the army left. Teft stayed with him and everything was okay, and then the Fused had to come and take Gurathero, and that was painful. That was painful to watch. It was interesting, though, what Kaladin did, and him kind of working with hiding from the Fused and kind of helping the sibling and Navani. Yeah, the siblings in this book. The siblings in this book. But anyways, moving on. Helping them with their stuff, and there was that cool sequence where he was using the Fabrial. Anyways, all the stuff was going on, and it didn't feel like instant plunge in depression once he's back to doing his stuff again, which was nice, but he kind of did go back, which makes sense. And, oh man, that ending. So, the ending made sense. I can't believe they killed Teft, but I knew it was going to happen the moment he started talking about how he had this scene where he's like, everything's better now, and I'm happy, and I have my spren, and I'm off the moss and drinking, and everything's great for me. I'm like, he's gonna die, isn't he? And he died. I'm on the Moash hater train, like, anyways, that was really sad, and I appreciated that we weren't in Kaladin's head at that moment. I'm sure that there's a way to write that agony. I don't know it. Brandon Sanderson didn't show it. I'm guessing that would have been triggering, but that moment where he jumped off into the storm, and just, all the stuff that happens after that. Okay, I think that the sum of my emotions can come out to beautiful, and it made sense. And I mean, obviously I don't consider myself a depressed person. I have been in a depressed state, though, and I know what it is to just be on the ground and just doesn't seem like you can get any worse. Quarantine, that was for me, and I don't think that was me being depressed. I think that was a depressive episode, but that did make me appreciate Kaladin and his depression, how his friends keep pulling him out of it even when he doesn't want to be pulled out, and then it turns out is good for him. And just even the end where he's getting worse and worse, it made sense to me just because of that depressive episode. So yeah, I loved that part. Kaladin is probably one of my favorite characters, and man, does Brandon Sanderson put him through so much trauma, but he came through, and it was happy. Next, I'd like to talk about Navani. Maybe talk, maybe giggle, hopefully not. But Navani's arc was really cool. That I could kind of get her arc a lot. So she is this big person who loves Fabrials and studies them and organizes the scholars and helps with these discoveries. And she's always saying to herself, I'm not a real scholar. I just organize the other scholars. So she keeps saying over and over again. And it was a problem for her. It wasn't like it was like a huge problem. It wasn't like a character flaw. I don't know. But anyways, so then the tower gets taken captive and she's with her, oh man, what are they called? Ardents? Not really. Okay, yeah, Ardents. Basically trying to help, but not really help the fused person, who I think was called Raboniel. It's going to be really funny if it wasn't Raboniel. But anyways, and she discovers that the sibling, who is the Spren, the Bondsmith Spren of Urithiru, is talking to her and desperately trying to get her help. And yeah, it's cool. And then she's separated from her scholars, and you can just kind of see, as she gets more and more desperate, she's kind of falling back from, oh, I'm going to scheme. Oh, man, I'm doing a bad job of explaining this, but Navani's arc was beautiful. You could just kind of see almost like she was getting less healthy as she fell into scholarship, except that she wasn't really. It's like she was fulfilling herself in this way that was like she never had been able to before, and in doing so, she found so much amazingness, and Raboniel was there with her. I haven't talked enough about their dynamic, but man, and then the ending where she's like there and she's and Raboniel betrays her, but that moment with Raboniel, yeah, okay. I was not expecting to feel sympathy for the fused, but anyways, and just that ending, and especially when Navani bonds the sibling. I predicted that. I thought that might happen, that would be cool. Oh man, that moment. Anyways, Navani was cool. Speaking of having sympathy for the fused, was not expecting like any of the sympathy for the fused thing. I mean, I guess I should have suspected from this being basically the singer listener, I guess I shouldn't say personality book, to get an insight onto the fused. I don't know why I still expected them to be pure evil, but no. And so like the first instance of this happening when I read it was Leshwi. So there was that first battle where Kaladin and the Bridge 4 Windrunners, whoever they are now, are fighting the fused, the heavenly ones who basically have Windrunner powers. And Leshwi is there, and she fights Kaladin. They have this whole system of honor where they must, what is this called? Challenge them, and yeah, that was, it's like, oh cool, honorable enemy, cool, this is a cool dynamic. And then there was the moment where like Kaladin just spares the singer, fused actually, just like meh, and then Leshwi stabs Sigzil, and he's like, no, because it's Kaladin, and nah. And then she spares him because he spared the fused. And it was like, oh, wow. And then there was that moment where they were fighting, and they had kind of flown off, and then they saw that the village was being set on fire by these other fused who weren't being nice to the civilians. And Leshwi just kind of looks at him, he's like, go stop it. I'm like, and now I want Leshwi to be good. And now I really want Leshwi to be good. And oh, wow. I like Leshwi. So I'm really glad that she turned out good in some capacity. It's like, it was really funny. So with Venli, Timber had kept saying, hey, you should tell her that you're a radiant. You should tell her that you're a radiant. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Because, I mean, it went so well when Kaladin kept it secret. Why should Venli tell it if it went the way that it did for Kaladin? Doesn't Sarah learn? But no, so I'm like, don't do it. And then she finally does it, and Leshwi grabs her face like, how? I'm like, yep, I knew it. And then the scene cuts, obviously, because suspense, and then she sees, and like, Leshwi's just there saying, they've forgiven us, they've come back, and asking after Rua, or whatever her name was. It was just like the most beautiful scene. Why am I crying? Because it's a Stormlight book, but that was just so beautiful, and I loved the emotional depth, because I forgot, these were not humans, these were people, way back when, before they became fused, and whatever awful motives they had for becoming fused, there were people, and just, oh, wow. That was awesome. That was so beautiful. And yeah, that dynamic was explored so well with Raboniel, who was evil and kept betraying Navani again and again, but obviously had respect for her, and in the end they had that weird moment, and she had all those weird moments where you could see that she cared so deeply for her daughter. And that was so sad. And then with Leshwi, and she's got, I was that moment where Venli talks to Leshwi and is like, hey, can you save this surgeon's family that they're gonna execute? Because obviously you're like, no, do not do that to Kaladin. And then she saves them. It's just like, yes, it just makes me feel so good. So I love that dynamic, as you can see by my voice going all over the spectrum. Moving on now to Adolin and Maya. My voice is probably going to go all over the spectrum again because I love this dynamic. I really loved it back in Oathbringer. It was kind of weird at the first part of the Shadesmar sequence where you can see that his dead eye is there, but in the way where he kept respecting her, and then she came through for him at the battle, and you could see that this dynamic was just continuing through Rhythm of War, and he was so happy to see her in Shadesmar. So I knew that she would probably be revived in some way. I was pretty darn sure that that was going to happen. I was not prepared for Maya to speak for the first time while defending Adolin in the farce of the Ottersprung trial when they were trying to manipulate her in this way that nobody expected. That moment, it was just like, it was awful in that it's like, oh man, how dare they do this? And then Maya spoke up for herself, and I probably like this way more than I should, but I think that was just the most awesome thing. And yeah. And besides all of the cool, mostly sweet character moments, there was just so many reveals. Let's start with "we chose." Oh man, I mean, I suspected that. I kind of suspected that. There was this epigraph in The Way of Kings, something along the lines of, "I want to sleep," it began. I forget what the rest of the epigraph was, and I think it was one of those epigraphs that everybody was like, it sounds like they're gonna go to sleep, like the person saw that the Silent Gatherers were taking their blood, so they wanted to die, something like that. I'm like, could it be the Spren? That was what I thought. I might have heard that theory from somebody else. I'm not exactly sure, but I thought that might have been it. And it was. I mean, not like that it's a good thing that the Spren did that, but I still think that that's cool. That's really cool. And as for other reveals, what were their other reveals? Oh, they forgive us. The part where Leshwi is just like, the Spren have forgiven us. I mean, we've heard so much about the betrayal of the Spren by the humans that we're like, okay, the singers are the innocent people. No, apparently not. Which it makes sense, because apparently the humans are the Voidbringers and they brought odium, except that now they serve honor now, and now the Spren serve odium. So it makes sense that there was some kind of betrayal in the past. But that was cool. That was cool, especially from Leshwi, who's like apparently saw it all. I'd never put that together. And then all the types of light. That sequence, just where Nidvani is just going full-on mad scientist, just figuring this out, that was awesome. I had some flashbacks to pre-calculus, which I didn't like, but with all of those wavelengths and her trying to find the anti-sound, the anti-rhythm, and just trying to find it, I thought that was cool. I loved how Navani was learning to hum the rhythms and hear the rhythms. I thought that was the best. That was awesome. That needed to happen. And I was very satisfied by what the Rhythm of War was. Yeah, I didn't fully understand all of the mathematics of the stuff. I understood it enough to be like, okay, I see where Brandon Sanderson is going with this. Interesting. And I liked the foreshadowing. And I thought it was interesting. Little meta sense. I thought that it was well done. That part where she basically, in the middle of the night, she's working furiously, and then she finds the anti-sound to make the anti-void light or something. And she doesn't exactly say what it was. She says it sounds the exact same to her. And then later she says that the difference was intent. Not at the moment, but like later. Which was interesting because I don't know if an anti-sound wave is... Oh yeah, it is. It is possible, but it would sound the exact same. So as far as find an like, if this was real, find an actual physical, provable anti-sound that would be the one sound of all. I don't know if that's physically possible, like, if you don't have magic involved, but with the Cosmere, intent is important in ways I don't fully understand because I'm lazy, but I thought that was interesting that Brandon Sanderson kind of combined the two of real science with magical, you could, just magic, basically, in a way that even if, say, I wasn't trying super hard to understand all of the science, I could look at the end and she says, the difference is intent, and I can be like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. And at the same time, all of the math stuff leaves all the math people who actually like that stuff, and I kind of do, going, okay, I can see how this works, I can see how this intermeshes with the magic, because that's part of why we like Brandon Sanderson's work. So I thought that was really well done. I liked all the different types of light, and Lift uses life light. The sibling has its own type of light. And that leaves with the last thing I'd like to mention, which is Taravangian kills Race with Nightblood in what is basically a subplot. I should have seen something like this coming. We have this first interlude where Taravangian is talking to his friends whom have been with him for a long time, the people of the diagram, and we've always kind of got this dynamic from them, not that they're good people, but that they kind of trust and like each other, and just he says this heartfelt goodbye, leave me alone as a sacrifice, basically to make sure that you're safe and that the plan goes forward. So there's this character who is very clearly, we see he's unattached now. Should have seen something coming. I didn't. And now we see that he's slowly thinking, is there still a way to plan? He's slowly thinking of more hope, and you can kind of see in his interactions with Dalinar and his thoughts with himself, he's just slowly beginning to lose trust, say, in the diagram version of himself, in the there's no other way version of himself, and starting to be like, is there hope? Is there a way that I can stop this still? And he tricks Odium basically into showing him the whole thing with Renarin blurring the future sight, with basically in the same way as Atium from Mistborn, I don't know if you know, but basically Renarin could see the future as well, so he could see what Odium would do, and that would change what he would do, and then Odium would see that, and so that changed that, so on infinite forever, so they can't see what each other does. So he sees that Renarin is close to Dalinar, which blurs Dalinar's future, and that Szeth is there close to it. I forget exactly where he figured out that Szeth had Nightblood, but I think it might have been in that vision with Odium. It might have been later, something like that. But just that moment where he's like, Szeth is there, basically trying to come to kill him. I don't know why exactly, if it was something Dalinar was trying to do, or if it was Szeth just trying to... I don't really understand why Szeth was there. It makes sense, he was there to ask after his father and apparently murder too, but... then just Taravangian and Odium comes there, and then Taravangian is just like, no, it won't work, and he's like, wait a minute, Nightblood's here, Odium's here, and then he just kills Race. What? And then he sends to Odium, storms. What on earth? That was not expected. I expected Odium to continue being a problem through book 10 at the least. At the very least, I expected Odium to be stopped, maybe, at book 5. I did not expect Race to be killed in book 4 in a subplot, and storming Taravangian to send to Odium. So, all in all, I think I'm more scared now because, like, Taravangian is such a plotter and I mean, we had Race and we kind of understood he's just, like, general bad guy, like, it's just, I mean, Odium, you knew Race and Odium. I mean, he's kind of scary from Oathbringer, but at the same time, you could see he was beginning to crack, and we could beat him, he could be tricked, and now Taravangian? No, that's a completely unknown element. And that moment in the epilogue, Brandon Sanderson kept talking. I think it was the epilogue that he wanted to write for the longest time. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be a conversation with his Spren, which I like design. She was fun. But anyways, and then Odium Teravantian just comes in and wipes his memories like nothing. Oh no, this isn't Hoyd, the legendary, totally better than everybody else, never got bested pretty much ever. Oh no, let's just wipe those memories and completely mess up. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of what comes next. And oh man, that deal that Dalinar got into, it's like, it was a good deal with Odium, kind of, other than the whole sell his soul thing. And now with Teravantian, it's like, I really hope that Dalinar doesn't have to sell his soul somehow. I could see that being an ending of Book 5, like, oh no, Dalinar has had to sell his soul because Odium won, but somehow we have some sort of stalemate perhaps for the rest of Book 5. It's like, no, just please leave Dalinar alone. Alright, so that's about it for my reviews and my rants. I probably should have made a reaction video as separate from reviews because I had my reviews and then I just had me screaming at the camera. So if there's anything that made you insane about this book, then you could put it in the comments because I'd love to see it. I'm just going to say that the comments are probably full of spoilers, or like 3 spoilers, but you still don't want to look at them because obviously. I plan to post a review on The Way of Kings soon because I still have not reviewed my favorite book of all time. Do not know how I let that happen. But anyways, plan to do that sometime soon, so thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you soon.